Close your eyes for a moment. Now open them. Everything you just saw, your room, your hands, the walls around you, the texture of your circumstances, all of it happened yesterday. Not today. Yesterday. What you are looking at right now is not current. It is not fresh. It is not what is actually happening in this moment. It is a recording, a playback, an old broadcast of who you used to be, projected onto the screen of your present moment. And here is the difficulty. You have been treating this old recording as though it is live, as though it is happening now, as though it is the truth you must accept and build from. You have been letting yesterday tell you what is possible today. You have been letting an echo convince you it is the original sound. You have been living in a museum of past assumptions, surrounded by exhibits of who you were, wondering why nothing genuinely new ever appears. Tonight I want to show you a way out of this museum, not by renovating the exhibits, by walking out the door. There are two worlds operating simultaneously, not as metaphor, not as spiritual poetry. Actually, one world you can touch, one world you can only feel, the world you can touch, the bank account, the relationship, the body, the circumstance. This is the world of effects. It is the world of what has already been produced by consciousness. It is the shadow cast by the light of your inner state. It is the footprint left behind after the foot has already moved. The world you can only feel, the world of imagination, of assumption, of the inner state you occupy in this moment. This is the world of causes. This is where your life is being formed right now, in real time as you read these words. This is where creation actually happens. And this is the world most people are not living in, even though it is the only world with genuine creative power. What you see around you is not your reality. It is the result of your reality. It is what your previous state of consciousness produced, now made visible. The actual creating, the living, breathing, ongoing process of forming your next experience is happening in the invisible, in consciousness, right now. Here is the gap that imprisons most people, and once you see it clearly, you will never unsee it. In this moment, you exist in consciousness in the invisible realm where all things are possible, where you can assume any state, inhabit any identity, claim any reality. The moment you assume something genuinely, the moment you accept it as true in consciousness, with the full weight of genuine feeling, it is done. Not will be done, is done. In consciousness, assumption is completion. But then there is the gap. The physical world does not update instantly. It is on a delay, like a broadcast signal that takes time to travel from its source to its receiver. So you assume something new in consciousness, and for a period, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, the physical world continues showing you the old assumption. The bank account still shows the old number. The relationship has not yet appeared. The body looks the same as it did yesterday. And this is where most people lose everything they have built. They assume wealth in consciousness, but see the old number in the account. They assume love, but the evidence of aloneness is still present. They assume success, but nothing visible has shifted, and they conclude reasonably, it seems, given what the senses are reporting, that it is not working, that they were fooling themselves, that the invisible is not real. And so they abandon the new assumption and return to the old one. And the old one is exactly what the visible world was already reflecting. And nothing changes. But here is what they missed. The visible world was going to show the old state for a while regardless. That is not a sign the process is failing. That is the normal, expected behavior of a world that is always a step behind consciousness. The visible is always showing you where you were, not where you are. Yesterday's consciousness is what the visible is currently displaying. Today's consciousness is what it will display next if you persist. Not might, must, because the visible world has no power of its own. It has no will. It cannot choose what to reflect. It reflects what consciousness presents to it, with the faithfulness and the impersonality of a mirror. Most people wake up and the first thing they do is check yesterday. The bank account is yesterday's consciousness about money. The relationship status is yesterday's consciousness about love. The body in the mirror is yesterday's consciousness about health. And then they look at all of this yesterday, all of this old recording, and they let it determine what they assume today. But this is precisely backward. You do not assume based on what you have. You have based on what you assume. What you currently see is old news. It is the printout of an assumption you held before. It tells you about the past. But what you assume right now in this moment, in consciousness, that is what is printing next. That is what the visible world is being instructed to display in the days ahead. When you look at your life and dislike what you see, you are not looking at your current reality. You are looking at your past reality. And if you keep assuming based on your past reality, you will continue producing more of the same past reality, because the cause has not changed. The only way to create something genuinely new is to stop letting the visible world determine your inner state. To stop taking yesterday as your instruction for today. To go to consciousness, to the invisible, creative realm where all things are first made real, and assume there what you want to see here. And then to persist in that assumption while the visible catches up. This is the actual sequence of creation. Stated plainly, you inhabit a state in consciousness. You feel it as real. You accept it as true. In that moment, in the invisible, it is true not as wishful thinking, but as the actual established cause from which the visible effect will arise. Then there is the gap. During the gap, the visible world continues displaying the old state. This is not contradiction. This is delay. The message has been sent. The visible world is still receiving the old signal. Soon it will receive the new one. Your only task during the gap is to remain in the new assumption. To not let the old display, which is just yesterday, convince you that today is not real. To live from the invisible, not from the visible. To treat the evidence of the senses not as reality, but as old information. The way you would treat a letter that arrived today, but was mailed 3 weeks ago. It tells you where things were, not where they are. The invisible world is more real than the visible world. I want you to sit with that statement, because it runs directly counter to everything you were taught about the relationship between what you can see and what you can feel. The invisible is more real because it is the cause. The visible is less real because it is only the effect. The cause is always more fundamental than the effect. The blueprint is more real than the building, in the sense that the building cannot exist without first existing in the blueprint, while the blueprint exists independently. When you imagine something with genuine feeling, when you assume it is true in consciousness, that is reality forming. When you see it appear in the physical world, that is reality having already formed, now making itself visible. The imagining is the primary event. The appearing is the secondary one. Most people have this completely backward. They say, when I see it, it is real. Until I see it, it is just imagination. But the truth is, when I imagine it with genuine feeling, it is real. When I see it, it is simply the confirmation of what was already real. You must learn to live in the invisible, to dwell there as your primary home, to treat what happens in consciousness as more authoritative than what appears in the visible world. Because what happens in consciousness is where you actually are. The visible world is just catching up. Here is how to actually do this, not as a practice you perform at certain times, but as a fundamental reorientation of where you live. First, when you look at your circumstances, recognize them for what they are. Yesterday, old information, the result of a previous state, not the truth about your current one. You do not have to pretend they do not exist. You simply stop giving them authority over your inner state. They are information about the past. They are not instruction for the present. Second, go to consciousness. Withdraw your attention from the visible and enter the invisible. In imagination, in the quiet of your inner world, assume your desire as already fulfilled. Not going to be fulfilled, already fulfilled. Feel it, accept it, dwell in it until it has a specific, familiar quality, the way a known thing feels familiar, unremarkable, simply true. Third, persist. Stay in the invisible assumption even while the visible world is still displaying the old state. This is the whole practice, stated in its simplest form. Remain in the new assumption through the gap. Do not let yesterday convince you that today is not real. Do not check the visible world for evidence that the invisible assumption is working, because checking is the behavior of someone who is not sure, and certainty is what you have established. Fourth, trust the law, not as an act of faith in something uncertain, but as an act of understanding in something reliable. Consciousness is cause. The world is effect. The effect must always eventually match the cause. This is not optional. It is not sometimes true. It is the operating law of creation, as reliable as any law in physics. There will be a period, and you must understand this before it arrives, not after, where the invisible and the visible do not match, where you have assumed one thing in consciousness, and the world is still displaying something else. This period is not evidence of failure. It is the normal, expected operation of the gap. This is the test. Not a test imposed from outside you, but a test of your own understanding. Do you believe the invisible is real? Do you live in consciousness or in circumstances? Do you remain in today's assumption, or do you let yesterday's display drag you back? Most people fail this test not because they are weak, but because they have not understood the gap. They assume something new, feel it as real for a day or a week, then check the visible world. The visible world has not yet updated. They interpret this as rejection, as evidence that the invisible was not real, and they abandon the assumption. The moment they abandon it, they guarantee the visible world will never reflect it, because the visible can only reflect what is held in consciousness. And if you do not hold the assumption long enough for the visible to receive the new signal, the visible never gets it. But those who understand the gap, who know the visible is yesterday and the invisible is today, they persist. They remain in the new state through the delay. And then, without force, without struggle, the visible and the invisible align. What was assumed in consciousness appears in form, not with the surprise of a miracle, but with the quiet recognition of something that was always coming, that was in the only dimension that matters. Already true. The world you see is not the world that is. The world you see is the world that was. And the world that is the real world, the living world, the creating world, is invisible. It is in consciousness, in imagination, in the feeling of the wish already fulfilled. And that is where you must live, not in yesterday's printout, but in today's creation, not in the visible shadow, but in the invisible substance. When you learn to do this, when you stop being governed by the visible and start dwelling genuinely in the invisible, you become free in a way that nothing outside you can give and nothing outside you can take away, because you understand that the visible has no power over you. It is just yesterday, and yesterday is gone. Today is happening in consciousness. And what you assume today becomes the visible world of tomorrow. Stop living in the museum of your past. Stop letting the old recording tell you what is possible. Stop checking yesterday and calling it reality. Go to consciousness. Assume the wish fulfilled. Persist there through the gap. The visible world will argue. It will contradict. It will continue displaying the old state for a while longer. But it is lying not maliciously, simply because it is yesterday, and yesterday has not received today's signal yet. You are living in today. And today, in consciousness, you are already what you desire to be. The visible is catching up. And it has no choice. Consciousness is the only cause. The world is only its effect. Live in the cause, and the effect must follow. This is Neville Lectures. I'll see you again in the next video.